This is Hops and Spirits Bar Conversations. Come for the craft beer, bourbon, whiskey, and great drinks. Stay for the conversations. Here's your host, Jonathan Green.
Welcome and happy Thanksgiving week. Hope you get to spend some time with friends, family, loved ones. And if it's after Thanksgiving, happy day. I hope you're having a great one. We've got a great episode for you this week. We'll be talking with Fred Minnick, one of the foremost experts in bourbon. Talk about Repeal Day, his career, how he got into all this. It's a fun chat. And also just because, we're getting into the holiday seasons. Last week on Tasting Notes, we talked about pairing food and drinks. This time, buying bourbon as gifts, things to do, what not to do with Chad Watson, a.k.a. My Daily Bourbon. I hope you have a lot of fun, and hope you enjoy.
It's almost time. Where did I put those? Here they are. It's time for Tasting Notes.
It's time for another Tasting Notes, and joining me this time is Chad Watson, a.k.a. My Daily Bourbon. He's also, you can hear him on the Bourbon Life podcast. He's part of that crew. Chad, welcome in.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
It's good to have you back. We had you in over the summer for some summer school talking about starting whiskey collections. So, I figure it's perfect time. We're getting into the holiday season. Thanksgiving's almost here. And people are probably thinking about some Christmas gifts or, gifts for the season, maybe to take to parties, whatever. So I figured let's do some do's and don'ts with buying bourbon or whiskey. So I guess, first off, what's your thought on bourbon and whiskey as a gift?
I'm perfectly fine with it as a gift. My girlfriend, the first bottle she ever gifted me was Angel's Envy. And then one year for Christmas, she got me Jim Beam Distiller's Cut, which is when I discovered how much I love Jim Beam Distiller's Cut. Very upset that it's gone and I can't get any more. But, there are some people who would probably be like, I only drink high-end, fine bourbon, and this person got me Evan Williams. But, I'm for it. Now, there are some things that I'm like, you should probably never do that. Well,
So if you're for it, I guess, one, you should always know who you're buying for. If they are that high-end person, maybe don't get into trying to buy them a bourbon. But what are maybe a do or things to look for when you're buying someone a bourbon or whiskey?
If it's someone and you're with them regularly, or you see them on the occasional basis, kind of check out what they've got on their shelf, do some research, ask questions. Anyone who drinks bourbon on a regular basis, if you ask them, hey, what's something you like to drink but wouldn't buy yourself? Now, if they say something like Pappy 23, then you do the research on that, and you're like, oh my god, you that's out of the league. But if they're like, a Weller Antique or something like that, and you go to a liquor store and like, hey, my friend likes Weller Antique, what's close? They could suggest Maker's Cask Strength, Rebel Cask Strength Store Pick, Rebel 100. 10 year, if that's out at that time. Those are the kind of questions, and don't be afraid to ask people at the store. Coming from someone who does work in a liquor store, don't be afraid to ask those kind of questions, because I love talking to people about that and entertaining that, the idea that there are things out there to kind of make up for what the allocations that person wants. Maker's Cask Strength is my number one recommendation for anyone looking for a high proof weeder, and it gets so overlooked. And look, now there's a Maker's DNA coming out. The first bottle in that edition is 110 proof. Maker's original cask strength that you can buy on the shelf at $40 starts at 110 proof. So, just ask those questions, and maybe you could save money on items like that.
So, obviously people love to get gifts. It's nice to have that special surprise, with something that they might not have been thinking about. But there's always the danger. So what are some of the don'ts, things people need to watch out for when buying gifts for bourbon lovers, whiskey lovers?
Whiskey stones. So if you are a whiskey fan, you have probably experienced whiskey stones at some point in your whiskey career. Honestly, I don't know that anyone has ever gotten them for me, but I've gotten them for myself. Because early on in my whiskey journey, I was like, oh, these sound cool. At some point in time, everyone drinks their whiskey either on ice, they drink it cold, or they mix it with something, and they're going through that. No one just goes right into like, I'm drinking barrel proof neat. It just doesn't happen. But I did get some for myself. I didn't care for them. It's just kind of a hassle, like to wash them after every time you use them, and then put them back in the freezer. go through that. But I have been the person to gift, like my dad. I gifted him whiskey stones one year when he was getting into whiskey. I'm sorry, Dad.
You've learned.
Yeah, now I know better. But there's all too many times people come in and talk to me at work, or like I'll have people DM me on Instagram and they'll send me like gift sets off Amazon. Like, that box looks cool and it's nice that it comes with glassware and stuff, but it's, those things are neat. Look at those kind of things. Now, I don't know how practical it is. All as nice as those boxes are on Amazon, no one has anywhere to store them. No one just has a space to store a box this big with 2 glasses in it, or some whiskey stones in there. My next big thing is don't buy secondary. Like, just do not buy secondary unless you are just someone who has that kind of bank account to support that. There's no need to go out and spend $200 on a bottle of Blanton's because that's what your husband, your wife, girlfriend's father's uncle wants for Christmas. I mean, there's so many other things out there that are better than that. Or I don't want to say better than that are better options than spending $200 on that. Because they may really like Blanton's, and that's perfectly fine. But that was my table. I scooted my palm across it, sound like I farted. But there's no reason to go spend $200 on a bottle of whiskey for someone that costs $60 to $70. And that's my biggest thing is talking to someone today. I'm looking for bottle XYZ. I see that about 3 to 4 times a year on occasion. I passed it up on Facebook for $150. I said, unless you know that they love it for $150, you have $150 to just throw away at it. Don't do that on a $40 bottle. That's check this store. Do this. Or here's another alternative from that distillery. Here's a really good option. Or just keep trying. Don't give up yet. Don't go spend $150. Unless time is money to you and you'd rather spend the money than the time, I would never suggest going secondary.
Well, and there's just a whole plethora of other issues on secondary as well that you have to watch out for. So I guess for my last question, because this is something that you guys do very well at your liquor store that you work at, and a lot of them do too, is a store pick. Is that a good idea, or can that be, you got to watch?
It depends on the store. If you're someone who's well versed in store picks, then absolutely great gifts. It's unique to that store. That store picked it, or they had it picked just for that store. But never just go in and say or tell someone, "Hey, I want something unique." And someone comes into me, I'm gonna say, "Hey, store picks are unique to me. They're unique to my store. I picked them. So let's pick them in Louisville, or I sent my friend and supervisor to go pick them." But where I work, we price things reasonably. That's not the case for everyone. There are some people who will take a pick that costs $60 and they'll sell it for $120 because they don't know if anyone's going to buy that pick, so they want to make their money back as quick as possible. So that's another thing you have to do your research on. But ask around. Don't just go to the first liquor store. I'm going to buy that. Shop around. If they let you try it, you try it. If you like it, you think that person will like it, then go for it. If you don't mind to call that person and say, "Hey, do you like bourbon so-and-so?" And they say yes. Cool. And if that store's got a store pick of it, take that, because that's how I found my love for Russell's picks. Is I had someone give me one of those as a gift one time, and I love Russell's 10-year, and that sent me down this path of just, all right, I'm gonna go to this store. They've got a Russell's pick. I'm gonna get that one. I'm gonna go to this store. They got a Russell's pick. I'm gonna get that one. All right, I get to try this one. I'm gonna get 2 of those, and then that's a whole nother deal. And then there's a few whiskeys I've done that with, but I've tried to slow that down.
But again, it goes back to just ask the questions, see what they like, and just don't be afraid to ask. And who knows, you might be able to find a nice gift for somebody. And Chad, thanks for sharing a little bit of do's and don'ts on bourbon and whiskey for the holidays.
Hey, no problem. Appreciate you for having me, man.
Remember to check out Hops and Spirits on social media at Hop Spirits, all one word, on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also find Hops and Spirits on YouTube and at hopspirits.com.
Joining us now on the Bar Conversations podcast is a man the bourbon world, really the drinking world, should know just by seeing that lovely ascot. We have Fred Minnick, best-selling author, bourbon curator, taster, host of the Fred Minnick Show, also part of the Bourbon Pursuit crew. Fred, thanks for taking some time to talk bourbon and a few more things with us.
Yeah, what's up, Mr. Green? How you doing?
I'm good. I will say this. I was nervous to actually drink any bourbon because my palate is nowhere near yours. So I decided
you gotta train yourself, man.
I'm working on it.
Don't beat yourself up now. Come on.
But so I thought I'd be smart since hops and spirits. I went with something that's a bourbon barrel ale. So I got some Lexington Brewing Company.
Solid
bourbon barrel strawberry ale. So
yeah, solid stuff right there.
So
now, I have a question for you. Like, I've always been fascinated with people's with the last name Green, who have an E on the end of it. Did anyone ever tell you like how you got an E and how it wasn't just green without an E? Like weird stuff like that fascinates me.
No, but I have been called every version of green.
How do you mess up the pronunciation of green?
Well, they'll throw like the E. They'll think the E's on there. I mean, my favorite part is though it's not always the pronunciation; it's the spellings. They screw up Jonathan and Green all the time.
I can see Jonathan, but Green, yeah, I can see that too.
Yeah, I guess it's just confusing. I don't.
Well, I think human nature at some point in our lives, we're all lazy, and maybe you're just catching people in that moment. So, but I'm excited to be here with Green with an E. Again, I'm going to have to look that up. Because
I know I've got European history like Germany and English somewhere over there. I just don't know. My mom has done some digging, but I just don't know. I don't. Maybe it was just always that way. They had a little extra money, bought an extra E, and that's how it's always been.
Yeah, that's the whiskey with an E and without an E. It's the E.
Maybe we took the extra E.
Maybe that's it. Well, I'm glad to be here.
Well, I appreciate you being here. What's in your glass tonight?
I'm hobbled, as I mentioned. I have an Achilles injury. I didn't have a full rupture, but I have like a slight tear, and it's inflamed. And I got when I called in, my camera wasn't working. I was like, I do this hundreds of times, for my own show and everything. So I was like, what the hell's going on with my camera? I'm like having this like pissed off fit in my brain. And I had the damn thing recording. And, you can't, for those listening or watching, you can't record and then use your camera as a streaming device at the same time. It's like it's like oil and water. It doesn't work with the computer. It doesn't jive with the HDMI cable. And so I just fixed that, and then on my way back to my seat, I tripped and hit my foot that's injured. And I was like, fuck, this hurt. I need something good to make me feel better. And so I grabbed the Remus Repeal, the 5th edition. So it's so good.
That's a good way to make you feel a little better on a rough day. You mentioned for those watching, you can see the lovely bourbon collection behind you. Behind me, you see a lovely picture of flowers.
It's a nice one. Is that a Monet?
I don't believe so. It may be a Money. I'm not sure. But how did you become this bourbon man? Because everyone knows you now as with everything you do from events and so forth. But how did all of this get started?
It all starts, in a tour. I got home from a tour in Iraq, and I'm having a real tough go. And I'm dating this beautiful woman from Kentucky. I ended up moving down here, and I got a job as a food editor for a trade publication in the restaurant industry. And I basically just I started writing about food, and I started writing about alcohol around the same time. and that had been in 2005, 2006, and then at the same time I was having a lot of I call them war demons. So these are things that anyone who has served in combat or has experienced combat or experienced any kind of prominent trauma will have reminders, and they will have nightmares, and that was kicking my ass for a lack of better phrase. And I had to focus on myself, and I quit that job so I could get some high level therapy, and at the same time I had to make a living, and I was freelancing, and I was a freelance writer, and one of the first things I wrote about was the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, and it was for a little magazine called Successful Meetings, and it that was in 2006. The story would be published in 2007, and I just keep writing about it. And I think at the time I was covering wine as well, and I was covering how to make cement and how to do your lawn. I was doing anything that I could do for a magazine or a newspaper. I was a stringer for the sports section of the Courier Journal. I was just I would write about.
You were working hard. You were working hard.
I've always been a hard worker, but this was a time in you're working hard, and I'm making $50 for a story. So you go and bust your ass for $50. When you're a writer, everyone pays their dues like that. There's it's very rare someone is gets the wand of Penguin Publishing their way, and suddenly all the roses and manuscripts are opened up for them. That doesn't happen that way in writing. You have to hustle, and if I've ever been anything, it's a hustler. And I've worked hard, and during that time, I was writing about all these things, but I was also in therapy. And in therapy, one of the techniques that I learned that kind of helped me break away from a lot of those war demons was taste mindfulness, where I would put like a barbecue potato chip on my tongue. I would crunch it. I would feel the texture, the salt, how the chip crunched in my mouth, and it was just for the first time I was connecting my tongue, my palate, to my brain, and I was able to apply that to bourbon. So I was covering bourbon and wine, and also tasting it. You can't cover this industry without tasting the stuff. If you do, you're pretty, no pun intended, you're a pretty dry writer in the space if you're not tasting. And so I noticed that technique that I was using in therapy was helping me trace and find notes, and that'd be a part of training my palate. And that was, between 2006 and 2010, in that time frame. And I get to I get to having this curiosity about whiskey at a much deeper level. For one, I would ask the questions: why? How is it made? Today, you go on social media and there's everybody's rampant wanting to call everything out and everything. But back then, there really was not, people doing that. There were a couple writers who would, but they were just writers, and it would live on a blog and be kind of shared in a vacuum. I took a very journalistic approach toward bourbon, and I got sources inside distilleries to tell me the real mash bills, the ages, where stuff came from. Some distilleries would just flat out cooperate and give me the information I requested, but it was a time of no transparency, and I was always knocking on the door trying to learn more information, and along that way, I was why isn't anyone talking about women and the background, the women, the history of women in this space? it was fascinating. And it's sad that that I had to be the one who write this book. But the first book I wrote about whiskey was Whiskey Women. It was the story of how women have always been in whiskey, and Scotch, Irish, bourbon, all of it. And I would go to these distillers and I'd ask him about the stories of the women and their history, and they didn't have them. They didn't know them. And so my method of telling the story of bourbon has always been through government records, tax records, lawsuits, things that haven't been through the marketing purview and sullied with, MBAs trying to spin a yarn to sell a bottle, I've always been about like getting as close to like real fact as possible. And that's where Whiskey Women came from, was just, seeing that no one had told the story and finding all these incredible women that had, made a dent in the whiskey industry. And so that book came out in 2013. And at that same time, the year or two before, I was nominated for World's Best Wine Writer for the under 35 category. And I was in London for this award ceremony. I didn't get it, but that was one of the most important moments of my career, because I'm in this room with all these iconic legends, and all I could think about is I want to be around Fred No. I want to be around Jimmy Russell, Parker Beam, and I just wanted to be around whiskey people. And that was the moment I decided to leave wine and focus solely on bourbon, which at the time, as a writer, that was a bad business move, because there was not a lot of publications paying people to write about bourbon. But I went with where my heart was, and Bourbon Curious came out in 2015. Bourbon Rise Fall came out in 2017. I co-founded Bourbon Plus magazine. I'm no longer the editor of it, but I co-founded, very proud of it. Co-founded Bourbon and Beyond. All these years later, I still always go back to that room in the wine world where I wanted to be around bourbon people.
Well, it's amazing too how far bourbon has come, because you talk about kind of writing about the Bourbon Trail in the early 2000s, and really,
yeah,
people, it was there. Did a lot of people know about it? It's not like it is today. Even just since I've been in Kentucky, which is about 6 years now, I remember my first time going into the liquor barn, and Buffalo Trace took up like half of an aisle almost, and now it's one little spot if you can find it. How has the industry in the bourbon world changed since you kind of jumped into it to what it is now?
Well, let's start with the good. The good is the distilleries are more transparent. Now, you still have Jim Beam and Buffalo Trace not disclosing their mash bills, but when you talk to them, they get pretty close. They give you as much as they possibly can. But for the most part, the industry is like 10 times more transparent than it was when I started. And in one of my books, I think it was Bourbon Curious, I wrote, like, I'd love to see the mash bills, the ages, the char numbers, and all that. And I'm looking at bottles on my shelf right now that have that information, and that just that excites me to know, like, there's so much new blood that is like pushing forward a transparency envelope. And this is an audience too, where you get out of line very fast. I don't care who you are, bourbon consumers are going to call you out, and that is we live in a world that doesn't want to get called out on social media, and so bourbon distillers have done a pretty good job of being transparent. So that's something that's good. That has happened. I would say, in the bad category, we have seen a proliferation of I think a bit of craziness. There was just a report that came out that people are threatening liquor stores over high-end bourbons and stuff. I think that the bourbon culture has gotten a little out of hand in some ways. And it's like this FOMO, this fear of missing out. people wanting a bottle, and it reminds me of the Cabbage Patch doll hunts of like the 1980s. It's like there were mothers and Toys R Us like pulling each other's hair and hitting each other with baseball bats, and Bourbon's got that thing going on with like 42-year-old men like, I gotta have my pappy. No, it's just like, what the hell is happening here? And then you got people just like wanting to get into whiskey, wanting to get into bourbon, and they join a random like Facebook group and they post a picture of it. It's like, hey, is this any good? This is their first interaction with this bourbon group, and they get drilled, lit up, called everything from a tater to like a noob, and basically just get chased out, and that's a little bit, if you're in that circle, it can be like, funny, but I mean, there's a lot of weird shit happening right now on the consumer side, on the social aspect, and I don't know if I like that, but I think the worst thing happening right now in bourbon is the pricing. There's a lot of brands that they can't help it; they have to price themselves high. But bourbon has always been like the everyday person's drink. It was not marked up to Scotch levels, and bourbon's beginning to price itself out of the people who brought it to the dance, and that scares me. As long as Wild Turkey and Maker's Mark can be purchased, we'll be okay. But the minute that those bottles have to go to $60 just to be competitive in the market, we're in trouble. We've lost the root of what bourbon is. But bourbon is less expensive to make than something like Armagnac. So I don't think we'll ever get there. And I think that there'll always be like a value proposition in bourbon. But it's dangerous right now. It's dangerous, there are new people coming into the game that they walk into a liquor store. They want something that's good. You point them to Four Roses Single Barrel. They're like, oh, that's kind of cheap. It's only like $35-$40. I was hoping to get something that was $200. This happens every day. And so the liquor store owner's like, well, I have this, and it's a bottle of Blue Run or Foregate or some kind of sourced whiskey that has been marked up so the people can get the people who own those brands can actually get a profit. Now, those brands, there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. I'm just saying that you have people who are turning down very, very good whiskey based on the fact that it's $100 less expensive. And I just think there's something wrong with that, and there's nothing that we can do to educate people. We've tried, but the liquor stores are making money off of it. There's a whole weird thing happening with the pricing and the purchasing of bourbon. And I would love to sit down with an economics professor. Actually, I might call one, and just to find out what the fuck is going on. Like, there's got to be like some kind of human weird thing in our brain that gets people to do this.
I was gonna say it's like was it Burger King or one of them? I don't know if it's true. I at least seen it on the internet. They priced like lower than McDonald's, like the Big Mac, and people just didn't believe it was better, so they just never bought it. So like I don't know. Maybe there's something weird with people. I'm of the mindset, drink it how you like it with who you like. That just if you like putting something in with Coke or whatever, drink it neat. As long as you're enjoying it, that's
I've never been one to tell someone how to drink it. I will say that if we're having like I get hired a lot for like analytical kind of stuff, and people bring me in to like teach them how to be a professional taster, and that is my classroom. We're not adding water to it on the first taste. This isn't an enjoyment process. This is like being a critic, So, that's a little different. There's a lot of macho guys like, oh, don't be putting ice in there. They put ice in their whiskey at some point. You're going on. And listen, I'll tell you right now, I drink Jack and Coke. If I'm at a festival, it's hot. I'll have a ginger ale and Jack or Beam, or Jack and Coke. I mean, it's good. And I don't want to be, out in the mosh pit in 110 degrees with straight whiskey in my flask. I mean, I need something to cool it down a little bit because I'm in a mosh pit. Now, granted, the mosh pit days are a little slower than they used to, but by God, I still got it in me. I'm good for one push, probably. But anyway.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, do you drink anything? I mean, you kind of talking, you do a little mixing every now and then. I mean, are you enjoying anything besides bourbon and whiskey? I mean, is there beer or barrel aged?
Jonathan, yes, absolutely. I'm a rum head. I love Armagnacs. I love brandies. There's one spirit I loathe, and I don't touch. But for the most part, I'm a fan of most things. Now in the beer world, so I mean, I've written books on rum and I've written a book on mead. Like I make my own mead from time to time. And I am not in the beer world, and I know you're a fan of hops, but I'm not. I'm not a big fan of hops, and I don't cover beer, so I'm just a consumer of beer. I love pilsners. I love lagers. I love oatmeal stouts. I like, and the thing with the hops, man. In my research of whiskey women, I came across like all these brewsters. These were women who brewed like 1,200 to 1,500, and hops were kind of in this time frame and up into the 1700s were circulating, and women played a role in hops. But there was a particular village in England that all of these brewsters were blocking the use of hops in brewing, and they basically got pushed into why, it's because like it made their husbands fart all the time, or they made them really gassy, and I remember, I'm not going to say that's me, but I feel very different after drinking a very hoppy beer, like several of them, than I do if I'm drinking a clean, crisp, lager. Plus, I'm trying to lose weight, and Jonathan, you're a skinny fella. You probably don't. You probably have a high metabolism. I look at a cheesecake. I look at a cheesecake, and it goes straight to my hips. So I gotta be careful with the calorie intake, and I can regulate spirits a whole lot easier than I can regulate beers. Put it that way.
I'm kind of like the opposite. I can regulate my beer. I know when I'm getting a little too much. It's the whiskey that gets the best of me, but I'm still learning that one. You talk about writing. I'm a writer. That's my day job now is PR. I used to be in newspapers. So you're speaking my love language. Yeah. Well, I got out of the business just at the right time.
Well, the newspaper industry, that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, it's whew.
Yeah, but I mean, you're a writer. I mean, what is it that drew you into writing? Like, because I mean, like in high school, I hated it, and then somehow I ended up becoming an editor of a newspaper, and I don't understand how that worked. But
yeah, this is a poignant moment for me. So I was in FFA. It was formerly called like Future Farmers of America, and I was showing pigs and sheep and doing all this stuff, and I had a bunch of animals like growing up, and we were winning all of these shows across the county and state, and my ag teacher pulled me aside one day and said, "Hey, why don't you start writing articles and faxing them over to the Oklahoma County newspaper?" And so I did. I typed it up on like the electronic typewriter, and I faxed it over to the newspaper. That Thursday, it was printed, and I was like, "Wow, this is my story." Yeah, there's some commas changed, some words changed, and stuff like that. But I was hooked. I was like, that was the moment. I mean, I've looked at some of my early writing. Oh God, it was horrid. But I was like, I have to do this. The county newspaper ended up giving me a column. I was like, at that point, I wanted to be a veterinarian. I changed all of that to want to be a journalist. And it, but, it's still kind of like you're in high school. You don't know what the hell you want to do.
Yeah.
I am in my senior year of English. And my English teacher is going around the room wanting to know what people want to do with their lives. I'm really proud of this because this is English class. This teacher had been, really, maybe, I don't know if it was my senior year or junior. It was in fucking high school at some point. And she was someone who meant a lot to me because she taught me Thoreau, Walden. I learned a lot through her. She was a very passionate, teacher. And everyone was going around the room, and she was complimenting them and what have you. It was my turn, and she asked that question. I said I wanted to be a writer. And she stopped, and she looked at me, and she said, yeah, I think you should be a welder. Because I'm, at the same time, I'm in like FFA, and welding is one of my curriculum. And I was like, I wasn't hurt. I was fucking pissed. And I was like, I'm going to show you. And this was around the time that it became public that Michael Jordan had gotten cut from his basketball team like his sophomore year. And I was like, I was livid about this. And I was like, this was my fuel. This became like my battle cry for everything. And I went to Oklahoma State, got a degree in agricultural communications, wrote for the school newspaper. I was the youngest copy editor at the Daily Oklahoman at that paper's history at that time. I did all of these things that was just kind of like, I'll show you. And that was always it. And, kind of like I was saying before, writing is not like you want to do it and you wake up, you're fucking Hemingway. You have to pay your dues and you have to work and you have to find your voice. And I would go through a lot of different things and steps in my life to where I am now. But yeah, so that is how I became a writer.
Well, and it seems to turn out okay. I mean, you're a best-selling author, so I mean, I think
it's funny. Like I've legitimately made. I think I've made 5 lists, like these best-selling author lists. There's like so many different lists. And when I made the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, and I think I made the Boston Globe bestseller list, but they don't amount to jack shit. They really don't. Like they just sound fancy. And even those people who've made like the New York Times bestseller list, which that's the creme de la creme, they still if they don't have a book that has a life that keeps on going. I mean, you write a book and you put all this effort into it and everything, and then it's like it doesn't keep selling. It's gone. You don't get any money out of it. It's the bestseller lists they're nice, but I'm more proud of a lot of other things. That's usually what people want to lead with me, but there's definitely a lot of other things to me that make me feel more proud of what I've done.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, being in the newspaper industry, people would be like, "Oh, you didn't win this award or that award," and I'm like, I don't care if I win an award. That's voted on by so and so. It's whatever. Especially like press associations and things like that.
Right.
And like it's sometimes they just pick the top 3 off a pile. I'm more excited when I've written something, someone comes back and says that was amazing. I'll never forget. I was a sports reporter, and someone was like, I'd done a little feature on a kid and playing baseball, and when he was signing to go to college, their family asked me to write the signing story. I was like, well, that's a lot of pressure, but I love that. That was more meaningful to me than than anything else. And you've written a bunch of books. I mean, are there any that was more fun to do, or are they all like kids and they're all your favorites? I mean,
yeah, I mean, they all are like kids, but, my favorite book that I've ever written was Bourbon, The Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of American Whiskey, because of all the first source and new information on the history of bourbon that was in that book. And, there was a lot of the history of bourbon had been oral up until that point. And or from distillery, communication. And I dug through tax records, congressional testimony, old newspaper clips, and things like that. And one of the things that has always been wrong in the story of bourbon history has been prohibition. Like how medicinal whiskey worked, and that was an entire chapter for me. I just am so proud of bringing that to the forefront, and that one won my biggest award, and it was like that was one where like I read distillery tax records for fun. That is no bullshit. Like, I enjoy reading what large distiller in Pennsylvania, what they had to pay to the government in 1952. Like, that stuff excites me. But yeah, weird. But that's the kind of stuff that, like, just my approach toward research is getting first sources. And so that book was all first source. A pretty close second is Whiskey Women. Whiskey Women, when I die, will probably be the most important thing that I've written because it opened the door. And again, I say this very candidly. It's a real shame that it took someone to write this in 2013. I was shocked of all the whiskey books and publications and things that have been out there that no one had written this before. I was shocked. And I was really proud of that work. And that one will definitely stand the test of time. If I could go back and rewrite a few things, I probably would, but it's one that is really, really important in the future of whiskey, because women, in my opinion, are far more creative and important to the rise and future of whiskey.
Well, they're bringing in some fresh ideas. I remember talking to Nicole Austin down at Georgia Dickel, and just some of the things that she was saying and where she was getting inspiration from was something I hadn't heheard from others. And I've only been doing this for a little while, but that was just,
and Nicole Austin, Nicole's great. She's part of like, she was coming on around 2000. We kind of came up around the same time, but she's amazing. And what she's doing at Dickel is like, and for any distiller to have a face and stand out within the parent company Diageo, you're doing amazing. It's a hard company to stand out in because they're publicly traded. They're about the dollar and making more money and all that stuff. They're not about building you as a personality. And she hasn't lost her personality. And if anything, she's gained on it because she's gotten more credibility because she's been doing things that people don't know. And then when the whiskey comes out, we're like, holy shit, this is only $35. This is awesome. So, I think the world of Nicole. And it's the one thing that I do sincerely dislike about a lot of the kind of the old school whiskey was how some of the women were treated. There was a woman who was up for master distiller in the 1940s, at a very prominent facility. But this was a time when women didn't wear pants, and they turned her down because they were afraid of how men would walk underneath the stairs and look at her, and I could hear it in her voice when I was interviewing her, and I did so. She's one of the very few anonymous sources I've ever used in my career. I could hear it in her voice how much that pained her, and I just thought to myself, we lost an incredibly talented chemist and distiller because of the times. And she went on to be a food chemist somewhere else, had an incredible career, retired, all that, and looked back in the rearview mirror with kind of like me with my English teacher, was like, fuck you. But you could hear it in her voice when I interviewed her, like how much that hurt her. And that, that is, that's a good thing that we're moving further and further away from that mentality. That's all I think.
Well, it hasn't been as quick as I think many of us would hope, but it's definitely gotten a lot better.
Well, I tell you what, if you have that mentality right now in 2021, then, we don't got time. I don't got time for you. I mean, I wish you the best, but, and if you make whiskey, great. I'll still taste it, but like it's time to give women absolute equal treatment in the distilling room. I'll just say that, like, it is, we are far past that conversation, in my opinion. Women have proven themselves, and to me, like when I'm formulating a panel for one of my conferences or events, I don't do women and whiskey panels. I put women in the rightful place in the panel that they deserve to be on. It has nothing to do with their gender or the color of their skin. It has to do with it that they deserve to be on that panel and they have something to offer. And that is where we need to be. So we need to get past like, oh, look, women are in whiskey. That is, that is not the conversation we should be having. It's like, it is that they deserve to be on the same panel as men and thought of the same as men. They are absolute equals. And I will tell you too, like, they're kicking ass, and the whiskey doesn't lie. Whiskey does not lie. Blind taste Nicole Austin's whiskey or Marianne Eve's whiskey, and you tell me how it fares. And it usually comes out near the top.
No, I'm right there with you, and I'm hopeful to see them get the rightful place and the accolades they deserve. You've interviewed a ton of people, whether that's through Bourbon Pursuit or even the Fred Minnick show. What's it like talking to some of these famous people that some would just be in awe to be in the same room, and you're sharing pours of 1940s bourbon and 1930s and 50s and all these random pours with?
Yeah, I think being in the military, really prepared me well, for famous people, because when you're a shit scrubbing private or specialist, a sergeant major is like a god. Like a sergeant major just walks around every so often and got the perfect press uniform, all these fucking patches, got a combat patch on. I mean, the dude pisses like acid. You think like this guy will kick my ass if I look at him sideways. And he comes up to you and gives you a coin, and you're like, oh my God. Now, those are the people that I get like in awe of. I get in awe of service people who've really fucking just crushed it, and that will always be where, who gets me excited to be around. Celebrities, they're interesting to a point. My whole thing is like breaking through whatever it is that's there, that veil. And usually I've broken through between the second or third bourbon, and they're like really being them, and they're just people, they're just people wanting to have a conversation. Now, granted, there might be like some whack job hiding in the bushes with a camera and their pants off to take a picture of them, but they're still, that's a whole nother issue. Fame comes with consequences, and that's one of them. But you look at my interview with like Peyton Manning, and Peyton, the guy spent more time asking me questions, and that tends to be what happens, is that a lot of people just get really fascinated and curious in the space, and it's just, to me, it's just having a conversation. Before anything that was on camera, I was just taking notes with a pen and paper or a recorder. And the one thing that I have never been afraid of or bashful of is asking someone a hard question or a stupid question, like if you know where the E comes from in your last name Green, So I've never been bashful of that. My father wasn't. My brother wasn't. My 7-year-old isn't. It's just some kind of genetic trait that probably makes me annoying to like 3/4 of the population who hears me.
I mean, has there ever been one that you look back and was like, that was one of my favorite, and then kind of like the opposite? Is there one you're like, ooh, I don't ever think I want to talk to them again? If you're allowed to say.
I don't give a shit. Yeah, no, I don't give a shit. And it's not because I can't. It's not because I don't want to say his name. It's because I can't remember it. But I butchered this guy's name so bad. It was like some kind of like European name that had like 5 Q's in it or something, and I just butchered it. And it would have been an easy Google for me to like find out what it was. It was pretty unprofessional. The ones that I dislike are the ones from my performance in it, and not the sources. Like it's not them. It's me. Like I never get upset with like a source or anything like that. Probably my favorite interview of all time was when I interviewed Ed Foote at the Kentucky Derby Museum. It was part of my series, the Legend series. Ed Foote was the last master distiller for Stitzel-Weller, which was, of course, the famed distillery that Pappy Van Winkle started, and all this great whiskey came from. Because it never, that was the first time that anyone had ever really given him any kind of like credit in public. I felt the same about my, Greg Metz interview, which Greg at the time was the master distiller for MGP, making all this incredible rye and bourbon for people. I think this was in 2012, and people didn't know who he was, and so this was like my moment to show people. And so I think my distiller interviews earlier in my career, I think of very, very fondly. Now, in terms of my celebrity interviews, I kind of teased it a little bit, but I'm a big like heavy metal fan. I like all music, but heavy metal relaxes me. And I got to I've interviewed both Metallica, Slipknot, which are the two biggest like metal bands. And my time with Metallica was incredible because I was there with Dave Pickrell, and what I didn't know would be some of his final days. And then, I've had a lot of time on stage and behind the scenes and on camera with Clown from Slipknot. And, he's a cool dude. And I think that's what it comes down to. It's just like he's just like a really cool, down-to-earth guy. But my favorite interview from a whiskey perspective has probably been Derek Trucks. Derek is one of the greatest guitarists of all time, It's just the guy really knew his bourbon. I tend to be more excited when they know their bourbon.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, the Fred Minnick show kind of started with music in mind, and pairing bourbons and whiskeys to music. What's on your playlist, or like what? Because I mean, you've had like E40, Ludacris, Slipknot. I mean, you've had like this wide plethora of people. I mean, are you listening to all that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I listen to all of it. I mean, right now we are in a lot of things that I listen to are dictated to by the family. So I have a 3-year-old who demands Hall & Oates like 24/7. Like
hey, that's better than what mine's doing, like Baby Shark right now.
Yeah, Julian doesn't want to watch Baby Shark. He wants to watch 1980s music videos of Crowded House, Hall & Oates, Spandau Ballet. It's freaking hilarious. But so a lot of that's dictated by that, and I'd say I listen to it all regularly, but I definitely have my genres and I have my moods. And right now, being hobbled with a messed up Achilles, I'm in a lot more of a soft rock mood because I feel like I need to keep my energy levels down.
You don't need to get in the mosh pit right now.
I don't need to get in the mosh pit. No.
And I mean, music and bourbon, you kind of put those two together. You talked about it at the beginning, with Bourbon and Beyond. What's it like putting stuff like that on and being able to do things like that? Because I mean, that seems to be right up your alley and the perfect mix.
Yeah, I am. I love being a part of cool events, and I love putting on cool events. And Danny Wimmer approached me about helping with Bourbon and Beyond, and I said no. He approached me again, I said no. And then I went to one of his festivals and I checked it out, and I was like, "This is incredible! I'm in." And I mean, we've booked Stevie Nicks, Foo Fighters, John Mayer, Lenny Kravitz. I mean, we've had a lot of really solid musicians, and I've always been the bourbon side of it, and it's really incredible because we've always talked about like bourbon distillers as rock stars, and I feel like I help put bourbon distillers on the stage with actual rock stars, and that's how I look at it. Is I've always been about my passion, and I've always been about like helping bourbon come to a higher level, and it's not because I'm trying to do anything. It's just like I feel like people deserve to know who Fred No is.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it should be a household name. Like Jimmy Russell should have his own TV show. So that's just my opinion, and I like trying to bring things up to that level.
Well, and doing events, I mean, I know you put on tastings, across the country when you're able to. What's that like to be able to travel and share bourbon with folks? Because I'm guessing that's probably one of the greatest feelings.
It's getting to see someone like the light bulb goes off, the cobwebs are removed, and they realize how much they like bourbon. That's an exceptional feeling. Because they understand it, and I don't do any of my tastings without forcing people. And I say forcing because some people would rather get right into the drinking. I don't do any of those without telling the history. And I think history helps you understand and appreciate what you are tasting. And that is the fact that I've been able to share so much of that over the years is, and I haven't done. I mean, I've given event tasting talks, since 2010. I mean, I'm probably close to, probably looking at 100,000 a year. Probably last year was a little lighter because it was all virtual, but it was like 20,000-30,000 people, but. a large number of people I've talked to in the past decade.
And when you travel, I've always been curious about this, especially people that love bourbon. Do you take like an extra bag so you can bring some goodies back with you that you can't get here in Kentucky?
No, I don't do that. If I'm going to a place that's like that, I will. It's usually overseas, and I found that it's better to do it inside a box, create a box around it. Like suitcases get fucked with, and they get pushed around hard. And a bottle is not meant to be in a suitcase. It's just not. No matter how well you preserve it, wrap it, it's going to get banged around, jostled. But if you create a box that is standing upright, you got the right packaging in there, it's just going to be like it's on a UPS flight. And so that's always been my motto. And the TSA is less likely to fuck with it if it's a box. I don't give a shit what anyone says. Bottles get stolen all the time. Maybe it's not the TSA. Maybe it's the luggage handlers. I don't know. But I can tell you right now, I've had bottles stolen. I know other people have had bottles stolen. And, they don't do that with boxes. It's a little bit more obvious that someone tampered with the box.
Get out the box cutters, and someone's asking questions very, very quickly.
That's exactly right.
Now, one of the reasons you got an event coming up here in December, on December 4th and 5th.
Yeah, Repeal Day Expo, baby.
Yeah. How? Obviously, it's not hard to figure out what it's about. But why did you decide to do something on Repeal Day? Although I do love on Twitter your pinned tweet of it's whatever random day it was, someone drank bourbon, let's celebrate.
Yeah.
But in this instance, it's an actual kind of holiday in the alcohol world.
So Repeal Day Expo, and you can get tickets at repealDayExpo.com. It's a virtual event. You get your own avatar, you walk around, and the whole purpose is it's a mingle and all that, but we need a reminder as alcohol enthusiasts, as bourbon enthusiasts, beer enthusiasts, that Prohibition happened, and the desire for certain types of prohibition have never went away. So there have been efforts to decrease the amount of advertising. There have been efforts to get warning labels on beer cans that say it causes cancer. There's been all these efforts to kind of thwart the access and growth of any kind of alcohol instead of teaching people to drink responsibly. Now, the industry has its role that's played in that, but from my perspective, you have a holiday that is not treated as a holiday, and it's kind of like no one thinks about it. But this is the day that FDR, repealed Prohibition. This is the day that he signed the paperwork, and people are able to drink again. 21st Amendment was signed, and it was basically pushed to the states. And that was the beginning of the three-tier system. That was the beginning of so many things. And so this is, while it's fun and there's a lot of moving parts, this was the beginning of a lot of the laws and stuff that we have today that people don't really know about. And that's what the expo is about.
I was going to say, it goes back to learning that history. I've loved doing this podcast. It has been something that has taught me, I was observant, but I wasn't as observant as I should have been. You talk about craziness, in Indiana, they can't put beer in the fridge because it's at liquor or, gas stations because, of random laws. And it's just so interesting that people may not know that exists.
Yeah, well, my favorite is in Alabama. They can't sell donuts next to whiskey. And in South Carolina, they can't sell magazines in liquor stores. So in Alabama they're trying to protect from diabetes, and in South Carolina they're trying to make sure that their drunks aren't well read. So whatever the hell's going on in those two states, I don't know, but there's just some weird stuff out there.
I think one of my favorite, I don't know if it's still a law, but there for a while, and I think it was Utah, that you had to make a cocktail behind a wall. You couldn't do it out in front. You had to make it behind the wall because, heaven forbid, someone figure out how you put the drink together.
And there's some states that require a piece of ice goes into a shot, so you can't drink it neat. So, yeah.
I mean, I love it, and you're going to have some panels too there. Can you talk a little bit about what people will get besides kind of that history as well? They'll also be able to enjoy a few things and even learn.
Yeah,
learn a little bit more.
I've got some really solid talent coming in, like Jason from Mash and Drum, Matt from ADH Whiskey. I've got my Bourbon Pursuit crew on there. I got Peggy No Stevens, Bourbon Hall of Famer. And basically what's happening is people are these like A-list personalities in the spirits community are being paired with brands, and they're going to have conversations, and they're going to taste the whiskey. And so at the VIP level, the brands get their addresses. Now I don't sell alcohol and I can't ship them alcohol, but like the brands, if they're comfortable with it, they'll ship directly to the consumers on whatever law that they justify that on. But so that's the cool thing, and we've got some really solid brands there. So,
well, no, and I love the lineup. I love talking to Peggy and I talked to her and Susan. Rigler. Yeah. Just so much knowledge, such amazing things that they've done. I want to finish this off with a little bit of fun talk. You're a whiskey bourbon guy. Let's be real. What's the bourbon that got you started?
I started drinking bourbon in the back of a pickup truck in the Deer Woods in I think it was southeast Oklahoma, and it was a Wild Turkey. So, and then legally, what I drank throughout college was Jim Beam.
I always love that. I think one of my favorite things was I was in college and I came back to play golf with my dad, and we were waiting on a hole, and he goes, "Hey, so what's your favorite beer these days?" And I was like, "Wait, you're asking me what? You're not. I'm not legal yet." What's a bourbon everyone should have on their shelf or on their cart?
Oh boy.
Or a couple.
There's like 20. Look, I mean, I'm having like this kind of like a passion, resurrection conversation about Knob Creek on a weekly basis, and I'm going to go with that. Knob Creek 9-year-old. Jim Beam returned that 9-year-old age statement, and I feel like they should be rewarded a little bit for doing that because they dropped it and then brought it back, and that's good. And it's great everyday bourbon, simple as that.
And then my last question for you: what's been one of your favorite pours that you've ever had that has just stuck with you through all these years?
Yeah, the greatest pour I ever had was definitely the Old Crow chest decanter piece from the 1960s. I made the unfortunate mistake of telling BBC Radio. Which BBC, I was promoting one of my books, and BBC wanted to interview me, and I don't know, it was the way this guy talked, and he was like, "Oh, so Fred, what's your favorite bourbon that you've ever had?" And I'm like, I never answered this question at this point, and I was like, it was the Old Crow chess piece, and I explained how I felt and all that. Well, a couple days later, somebody grabs that like interview and then posts it in Reddit, and it gets shared everywhere. And then I went from being able to find and buy those bottles for like $15 to like, a couple hundred to now like 700. I mean, it's just like I get sick in my stomach thinking about it because I loved love that. And I have I have a couple bottles left, but yeah, those are extinct.
So, and then I'm guessing you're never going to tell again what your favorite one is.
No, I mean, I'm in a little. I've come to grips with it. I'm just a big giant asshole that if I say I like something, I've come to grips with that.
Are you like the Oprah sticker on a book? You're the Fred Minnick sticker on bourbon?
Well, I don't know about that, but bourbons can be, or books, I'm sorry, can be reprinted. Bourbons cannot be, and that's the fucked up part. Is like. I've come to grasp with when I say I like something, I don't like it, but I know it can have an impact. And my wife has yelled at me about this because she's a big bourbon fan, and like I was talking about 1920, Old Forester 1920, and that's like one of her top fives, and We have my office bourbon, which is like where I get a lot of samples and stuff, and then we have the stuff we buy at the house. And she was like bitching at me for like picking Old Forester 1920 because she couldn't find it. And I was like, you're married to me, and that this is what I do. And like she was legitimately yelling at me about this. Like, why did you have to do that before I went and bought some? I was like, what do
you couldn't have picked the one I don't like?
I mean, it was an awkward moment. It was an awkward moment.
Well, I guess I have one more question. What do your kids? I mean, obviously your kids love your music taste. They love Hall & Oates, things like that. What do they think of all this craziness that you do in terms of all this?
Well, I'm a big believer. We share a lot with our children. My oldest is 7. He'll soon be 8. Our youngest is 3. So they're very young, and they're just they're everything to me. And they've already been to distilleries. Oscar, the 7-year-old, he's probably been to 4 or 5 distilleries. And he knows how bourbon is made. He knows what it's made from. He knows the tax structure of bourbon, and he knows about that stuff. He also asks questions about like how musicians are managed, and so we talk constantly about business. And the one thing that we always talk about is that you can't have anything because it'll impact your brain. Like you can't drink anything until you're a certain age, and we talk about physiological effects of alcohol, and my wife is in the medical world, and we have very blunt medical conversations about what alcohol would do. So we talk about it like that. We don't, we'll see. I mean, you do the best you can in educating, but I believe in talking instead of hiding, and that is my children know what I do, and I'm not ashamed of it. So that's, and if anything, dads will come up to me at a basketball practice or like at some kind of event, and they catch on, and they see and they understand. But it's like to be honest, it's like I never want to say like, oh, this is how I do it, I'm a great parent. Because parenting is fucking hard, and you do what you think is best for your kids. And is it right? Who the fuck knows? But I know I'm going to try.
Well, that's all we can do. My daughter just turned 3, and I know she's been to one distillery, and it was Buffalo Trace of all places. On my wife's 30th birthday, she was about like 7 months old at the time, but she's been to many breweries and has, I think, enjoyed all of them. Being able to play and be around just friends and stuff, and I've loved this chat, Fred, and I thank you so much. RepealDayExpo.com for Repeal Day Expo 2021, December 4th and 5th. Fred, thank you so much for having a drink with me and talking
Absolutely.
bourbon and alcohol.
I had 2 drinks with you. I re-poured in the middle of it.
I love it. I switched over to some Gallon Fox milk stout brewed in some.
Oh, very nice.
Maker's 46 staves. So it was a good switch.
Attaboy. Well, hey, man, I appreciate it.